The bells of the high cathedral rang out across the provincial capital, but not a single soul in the crowd wished the bride any joy. Evelyn Ashford stood at the great oak doors in a gown of pale grey silk, grey, not the white of a happy bride. She had chosen the color herself, the shade of mourning, so that every person packed into the pews would understand one thing plainly. She came to this altar as a woman burying her heart, not celebrating it. Her gloved hands were cold. 3 weeks ago she had worn this same grey to stand beside an empty grave, for they had never even brought her brother's body home. Captain Thomas Ashford, 24 years old, clever and laughing, gone in the Northern Campaign. And now the whole town whispered the name of the man they blamed for it, the very man who waited for her at the far end of the aisle. "Steady, miss," murmured old Mrs. Fenwick, the housekeeper who had raised her. "Keep your chin up. Let them see an Ashford does not weep in public." Evelyn lifted her chin. The organ swelled. She began to walk. Every face turned to watch her, and she knew what lived behind each one. Pity, yes, but also a dreadful, hungry curiosity. For the whole capital believed the same tale. They said Duke Vane had given a false order on that battlefield in the north, an order that sent young Captain Ashford and his men into a trap. They said he had done it to bury some secret, and that afterward, out of guilt or cruelty, he had gone to the ruined Ashford estate and demanded Evelyn's hand as payment for her family's remaining debts, a debt she could not refuse. Her father was dead, her brother was dead, and the creditors were circling the house like crows. So here she walked, toward the man the town called her brother's finisher, because she had no other choice left in all the world. Duke Alaric Vane stood tall before the altar, dressed in dark blue with silver at the cuffs, a long military coat despite the church heat. He was younger than she had imagined, perhaps 30, with a hard jaw and pale, watchful eyes that gave away nothing at all. He did not smile. He did not look pleased with his prize. He simply watched her come, the way a sentry watches a road. When she reached him, he offered his arm. She did not take it. A ripple of low murmurs moved through the pews. The vicar cleared his throat and began. The old words rolled over her, hollow as an empty barrel. Evelyn barely heard them. She was looking at Vane's hands, remembering that these hands had, in some way she could not yet prove, closed around her brother's life. "Do you, Evelyn Ashford, take this man?" "I do," she said before he had even finished. Sharp, final, let it be done. She felt the church hold its breath at the coldness in her voice. The vicar pronounced them wed. There was no cheer. There was only that thick, uneasy silence, the sort that settles over a room when everyone is waiting to see whether the sky will fall. And then Duke Vane did a curious thing. He turned, not to her, but to a manservant waiting in the shadow of a pillar. The man came forward, carrying something long and narrow, wrapped in black velvet cloth. It was the length of a man's arm, and Evelyn's stomach tightened. She thought of a blade meant for cruelty, some grim jest at her expense. Vane took the bundle. He drew back the velvet. A gasp tore through the entire cathedral. It was a sword. But not any sword. The hilt was worked in pure gold, shaped like a lion's head, and set into the pommel was a great crimson stone that caught the candlelight and threw it burning across the stone walls. Along the scabbard ran letters in old script that half the town could not read, but everyone had been told of in stories. The Emperor's Sword. Evelyn heard the name pass from mouth to mouth like fire through dry grass. A magistrate in the third row rose halfway from his seat, then sat again, white as chalk. An elderly clerk actually crossed himself, for everyone in that hall knew what the golden sword meant. It was not a weapon. It was a relic of the old crown, granted only a handful of times in 100 years. Whoever held it lawfully carried absolute authority beneath the throne itself. No sheriff could deny them. No magistrate could bar their way. No lord, however powerful, could stand above the one who bore it. And Duke Vane was placing it into the hands of his gray-clad, unwilling bride. Evelyn stared at the sword, then at him. Her carefully held composure cracked. "What is this?" she breathed. Vane stepped close, so close that only she could hear him beneath the rising storm of whispers. His voice was low and rough, and for the first time something moved behind those pale eyes. Not cruelty, something far more dangerous, urgency. "This sword is yours now," he said. "By law, by this marriage, it passes to my wife. No man in this province can question it, and no man can question you." His gaze held hers. "With it, you may open any door. You may command any magistrate, any sheriff, any archivist in this land to hand you what you seek. Do you understand me, Evelyn? Any door, even the ones that were locked the night your brother died." Her breath caught in her throat. "I know what this town says of me," he went on, quieter still. "I have not tried to stop the talk, because the truth would put a knife to both our throats before we were ready. But you want to know what truly happened to Thomas. So do I. And this—" his fingers pressed the golden hilt into her stunned hands. "This is the only key in the kingdom that can unlock it." The velvet fell to the cathedral floor. Evelyn's fingers closed around the cold gold without her meaning them to. It was heavier than she expected, heavy as a promise she did not yet trust. Around her the whole town sat frozen, staring, utterly silenced by the sight of the criminal's bride holding the highest relic in the realm. And in that ringing hush, one terrible question rose up in Evelyn's mind and would not let her go. If Duke Vane truly ended her brother, why had he just handed her the one weapon in all of England that could destroy him? Dawn came gray and thin over the provincial capital, and the wedding was already ending. Evelyn had expected a feast. She had steeled herself for a long day of forced smiles and the town's staring eyes, a duke parading his new bride through the streets to prove his power. Instead, before the church bells had even rung for morning prayer, Mrs. Fenwick shook her awake in the guest chamber. "Miss, my lady," the old woman corrected herself, still unused to the title. "The Duke means to leave within the hour. His men are loading the carriages now." Evelyn sat up, her heart already quickening. "Leave? For where?" "North, they say. His people in the valley." Mrs. Fenwick's weathered face was tight with worry. "It's a 2-day journey through the foothills, and he'll not wait on breakfast." So there would be no feast, no procession, no chance to breathe. Evelyn dressed quickly in a traveling gown of dark wool, and before she went down, she did the one thing that had mattered most through the whole sleepless night. She lifted the Emperor's sword from where it lay across the coverlet, wrapped it once more in its black velvet, and locked it inside a stout traveling case of oak and iron. The small brass key she threaded onto a ribbon and tied about her own neck, hidden beneath her collar, against her skin. Whatever else this marriage was, that sword would not leave her side, and it would not be taken from her while she slept. The courtyard below was a scene of quiet, practiced haste. Grooms harnessed a team of 4 dark horses to a heavy traveling coach. Servants strapped trunks to the roof and to a second cart behind. There was no wedding cheer in any of it, only men working fast in the cold, their breath smoking in the morning air. Duke Vane stood in the middle of it, giving low orders. He had exchanged his silver-cuffed wedding coat for a plain riding coat of dark green, and he looked, if anything, wearier than he had at the altar. When he saw her, he inclined his head. "Duchess?" The words sat strangely between them. "We ride hard today. I would have us clear of the town before the market crowds fill the road." "You mean before the town has time to gather and watch?" she said. Something flickered at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile. That too. He handed her up into the coach himself. She let him, only because refusing would waste time she did not want to waste. She set the locked oak case on the seat beside her, close against her hip, and rested one hand upon it. Vane's eyes moved to the case, then to her hand upon it, and he understood. She saw him understand. He said nothing, only settled onto the opposite bench and rapped once on the roof. The coach lurched forward. Mrs. Fenwick rode behind in the servants' cart, and the little procession rolled out through the courtyard gate and into the waking streets. Evelyn watched the provincial capital slide past the window. Shuttered shops, a lamplighter snuffing the last of the night's flames, a milkmaid with her yoke and pails stopping to stare at the ducal crest on the coach door. Word would race through the town by noon that the criminal had carried his gray bride away into the north before the wedding day was even done. Let them talk. She had a locked case beside her and a key against her throat, and those were worth more than any town's good opinion. For the first hours the road ran through gentle farm country, hedgerows and stone walls and fields of stubble left after the harvest. Then the land began to rise. The hedgerows gave way to open moor, brown and rolling, dotted with grazing sheep and the tumble-down shapes of old shepherds' huts. A cold mist clung to the low ground and did not lift, so that the coach seemed to swim through a pale sea with only the tops of the far hills showing. Vane did not speak. He sat with his profile to the window, watching the road, and Evelyn slowly understood that he was not merely brooding, he was watching. His pale eyes moved constantly, tracking the crest of each ridge, the mouth of each side lane, the dark line of every tree crest where it met the open moor. Twice she saw his hand drift toward the pistol case beneath his seat, then still, when the danger he'd sensed proved to be nothing but a startled grouse or a distant cart. The town believed this man was a criminal at ease with his crime. Evelyn watched him guard the road like a soldier expecting an ambush, and the picture would not match the story. "You watch the hills as though you expect them to attack us," she said at last. He did not turn from the window. "These roads are not always safe for a coach that carries something of value." "And what do we carry of value?" Now he looked at her. "You, Duchess, and what sits in that case at your side." She kept her hand upon the oak lid. "You gave me this sword freely. You could have kept it. You could have used its power yourself. A man who wished me harm does not arm me first." "No," he agreed. "He does not." "Then tell me plainly, why the sword? Why me? Why marry a woman who despises you and put the highest relic in the realm into her hands?" For a long moment, the only sound was the creak of the wheels and the muffled drum of hooves. Vane looked at her with those unreadable eyes, and she could see him weighing something, measuring how much to say and how much to keep locked away, the same way she measured her trust of him. "Because the answer to your brother's death is buried behind doors that only that sword can open," he said finally, "and because a duke acting alone would be stopped before he reached them. But a duchess, bearing the emperor's sword, cleared of all suspicion, mourning her own brother in the open?" He shook his head slowly. "No one will guess what she is truly hunting until it is far too late." "You speak of doors and hunting and truth," Evelyn said, her voice low and hard. "But you give me no names, no proof, only riddles wrapped in velvet. Why should I believe a single word from the man the whole town names my brother's finisher?" "You should not," Vane said quietly. "Not on my word alone." He turned back to the window and the passing mist. "But when we reach the manor," he said, "there is something in the library you must see. Your brother left it there himself, and once you have read it, Duchess, You will not need my word at all." Evelyn's hand tightened on the locked case, and the coach rolled on into the deepening fog of the northern hills. Vane Manor rose out of the northern valley like something from an old tale. They came upon it on the evening of the second day, when the mist had thinned to reveal a deep green valley cupped between gray shoulders of rock. The manor stood at the head of it, a great house of dark stone with tall chimneys and rows of narrow windows that caught the last of the failing light. A river ran silver below it. There was a stern beauty to the place, lonely and old, far from any town or prying eye. "It has stood 400 years, Vane said, the first words he had spoken in an hour. "My family has guarded this valley since before the old wars. Whatever else you believe of me, believe this. There is no safer place in the north for what we must do." Evelyn made no answer. She was too tired and too watchful to be moved by grand houses. Servants came out with lanterns to meet the coach. They were fewer than she expected for such a house, and they looked upon her not with the cold suspicion of the town, but with a quiet, wary curiosity. Word of the Duke had not poisoned this valley as it had the capital. Here, it seemed, Vane was simply the master, and she was simply his wife. She was given her own quarters, a fine chamber with a canopied bed and a fire already burning in the grate. Vane, she noted, had rooms in the entirely opposite wing. Whatever this marriage was, he made no move to treat it as a true one, and for that small mercy she was grateful. She set the locked oak case beneath her own bed, tested the door, and found it had a bolt on the inside. She slept that night with the brass key still tied at her throat. In the morning, she went hunting, not for game. Vane had spoken of the library, of something her brother had left, and she meant to find it before she trusted a single further word from him. She waited until she saw him ride out with 2 of his men toward the far end of the valley. Then she went in search of the great room he had named. The library of Vane Manor took up the whole of the east wing's ground floor. Evelyn stopped in the doorway, caught despite herself. Shelves rose 2 stories high, crammed with more books than she had seen in all her life, ledgers and atlases and old leather volumes with cracked spines. A gallery ran round the upper level. Tall windows let in cold morning light, and dust hung golden in the beams. The room smelled of old paper and beeswax and cold stone. Where to begin? Her brother had died in the north, but he had never, to her knowledge, set foot in this house. And yet Vane had spoken with such certainty. "Your brother left it there himself." She began with the great writing desk near the window, a heavy old thing of dark oak with many drawers. She searched them one by one. Correspondence, estate accounts, a box of dried ink pots. Nothing of Thomas. She was near to giving up when her knee, pressed against the desk's side panel, felt something shift. She stopped. She ran her fingers along the carved edge of the panel. There, a seam, cleverly hidden in the woodwork where none should be. She pressed and slid and worked at it until, with a soft wooden click, a narrow, hidden compartment sprang open beneath the desk's lip. Inside lay a book. Evelyn drew it out with shaking hands. It was a plain field journal, the sort an officer carried on campaign, bound in brown leather. But it had been through fire. The lower half was burned black, the pages curled and crumbling to ash at the edges, as though someone had thrown it into flames and someone else had snatched it out again half a heartbeat too late. She opened the cover, and her heart stopped. The handwriting was Thomas's. She would have known it anywhere, that quick, slanting hand she had teased him about since they were little. Her brother's own words, here, in this house, in a desk with a hidden lock. She sank into the desk chair and read. The early pages were only what a soldier writes: marches and weather, the names of his men, small jokes, a line asking after her and after their father's health. Reading them, hearing his voice rise off the page, she had to press her knuckles to her mouth to keep from weeping. He had been so alive. He had thought he was coming home. Then the entries changed. The hand grew hurried, the ink pressed hard enough to tear the paper. Thomas wrote of things that made no sense to her at first. Supply wagons that arrived half empty, grain and powder and medicine listed in the army's books as delivered in full that never reached the men who needed them. Whole shipments meant for the northern campaign vanished somewhere between the coast and the front. "The figures do not lie," he had written. "Someone is bleeding the supply lines dry and selling what should feed and arm the men, not a common thief. This is too large, too clean. This reaches the trade lords who hold the charters at Oakhaven. They grow fat while our men starve in the field, and they have covered their tracks so well that no ordinary inquiry will ever touch them." Evelyn read faster, her breath shallow. "I dare trust no one in the camp. The corruption may run through the officers themselves. There is only one man of rank in the whole North I believe stands clean of it, one man with the standing and the will to help me carry proof to the High Court where these lords cannot reach." She turned the burned, crumbling page with the greatest care, terrified it would fall to ash before she reached the name. The final entry was short, the ink of it scrawled and desperate. "I have sent word. He has agreed to meet me. If any man alive can help me break this open and see justice done, it is him. God grant we are not already too late. I trust only Duke Vane." The page ended there. The rest was fire and ash. Evelyn sat very still in the cold library, the burned journal open in her lap, and the whole shape of the world she thought she knew turned slowly over and showed her its other face. The town had it wrong, all of it wrong. Her brother had not been betrayed by Vane. Her brother had gone to Vane as the one honest man he could find in a sea of thieves. And someone had thrown his journal in the fire to keep it from ever being read. Her hand went to the key at her throat and then to the door, for she knew now that she and the Duke had a great deal to say to one another. She found him in the courtyard, inspecting the horses. The afternoon had turned bright and cold. Vane stood by the stable block with a groom, running his hand down the foreleg of a tall grey mare, checking the beast for some strain of the journey. He had shed his coat despite the chill, and worked in his shirt sleeves, and there was an ease in him among the animals that she had not seen at the altar or in the coach. Here, for a moment, he looked like nothing more than a country lord tending his stock. Then he saw her crossing the yard, with the burned journal clutched against her chest, and the ease went out of him at once. "You found it," he said. "I found it." Evelyn stopped a few paces from him. The groom, reading the air between them, murmured something and led the mare away into the stable, leaving them alone in the wide, cold courtyard. "You knew it was there. You put it in that desk." "I did." Vane wiped his hands slowly on a cloth. "I hid it the day it came into my keeping. I could think of no safer place." "Then you will answer me now, my lord, and you will answer plainly." Her voice shook, though not with fear. All the grief and fury of the past weeks had gathered behind it. "My brother wrote that he trusted you, that he came to you for help against these trade lords. He named you the one honest man in the whole North. And yet he is dead, and the town says you finished him, and you have let them say it." She took a step closer. "If he came to you for help, then tell me, why did you not save him?" For a long moment, Vane said nothing. He looked at the journal in her arms, at the black char along its edges, and something crossed his face that she had not thought a man like him could feel. It was grief, plain and heavy grief, and beneath it, older than that, a guilt he had carried a long time in silence. "Because I was too late," he said, "by a single day." He turned and set both hands on the low stone wall of the yard, looking out over the valley below. "Your brother's letter reached me in secret. He wrote, as he wrote in that journal, that he had uncovered a great theft, that the men at the front were starving while the trade lords at Oakhaven grew rich on stolen supplies. He said he had proof, or the beginnings of it, and that he trusted no one else with rank enough to carry it to the High Court. He asked to meet me on the North Road at a crossroads inn where we might speak away from the camp and its spies. And you agreed? I agreed at once. Vane's knuckles whitened on the stone. I rode for that inn the same hour. But the roads in the north are long, and the trade lords are not fools. They had eyes in the camp, as your brother feared. They learned he had found them out. They learned he meant to carry the proof to a duke they could not buy. He drew a slow breath. They did not wait for our meeting. They set upon him on the road before ever he reached the inn. His small escort was overwhelmed. By the time I arrived, it was already done. Evelyn's throat closed. You saw him. I found the aftermath, Vane said quietly, and he did not describe it, and she was grateful, for she could not have borne it. I found his campaign chest overturned, and this journal half thrown into the fire the raiders had lit. I pulled it out of the flames with my own hands. I saved what I could. The rest was gone. The wind moved across the courtyard. Evelyn found she had sat down upon the mounting block without meaning to, the journal in her lap. But the town blames you, she said. How? Why would they name you the finisher when you came to help him? Because the trade lords are clever, and they were afraid. Vane turned to face her fully now. A finished captain draws questions. A duke seen riding north to a secret meeting draws worse. So they turned the story on its head. They spread the tale that it was I who gave the false order, I who sent your brother into a trap to cover some crime of my own. A lie, but a useful one. It made me the finisher in every mouth in the province, and a man branded a criminal, watched and mistrusted by every magistrate and sheriff, is a man who cannot move against them. They did not merely finish your brother, Duchess. They chained the one lord who might have avenged him. Evelyn stared at him, the whole cruel machinery of it turned in her mind, each wicked piece fitting the next. The stolen supplies, the crime on the road, the lie that made the honest man into the villain so that he could never fight back. Then this marriage, she said slowly, understanding coming to her cold and clear. The sword. It was never about my family's debts at all. No, he held her eyes. Alone I am powerless, watched, suspected, barred from every door I would need to open. But the Emperor's sword answers to bloodline and to marriage, not to reputation. In the hand of my lawful wife, it carries full authority, and no whisper of crime clings to you. You are the grieving sister, above suspicion, mourning in the open. With that sword, you may walk into places I could never reach. You may command the archives, the ledgers, the shipping records the trade lords have kept locked away. Everything we need to prove what they did to your brother and to 100 others like him. He crossed the yard and knelt on one knee before her so that his eyes were level with hers, and it was not the pose of a husband, but of a man swearing an oath. I could not tell you before the wedding. If a single word had reached them that we were joined against them, they would have struck at us both before we ever left the capital. I let you hate me, and I let the town hate me, because a hated man draws no suspicion of a plot. But I never lied to you, Evelyn, not once. I only stayed silent, and I am done with silence now. Evelyn looked down at the burned journal, at her brother's slanting hand, at the last words he had ever written. I trust only Duke Vane. Thomas had trusted him with his life. It had cost him that life, but the trust had not been misplaced. She was quiet a long moment. Then she closed the journal and stood, and something in her had changed, hardened, turned from grief toward purpose. Then we do not wait, she said. We go to Oakhaven. We find their ledgers, and we bring the whole rotten house of them down. Her hand rose to the key at her throat. You have given me the sword, my lord. Now I mean to use it. Oakhaven was a different world from the quiet northern valley. They came down out of the hills after 4 days on the road and saw it spread along the coast below them, a great port city crowded against a gray and glittering sea. Even from the heights, Evelyn could hear it, a low roar of 10,000 lives, and smell it, salt and tar and coal smoke and fish. Forests of masts crowded the harbor. Ships rode at anchor with their sails furled, and long stone quays ran out into the water thick with the traffic of the world. "The richest port in the north," Vane said, seated across from her in the coach. He had changed, and so had she. They had planned this on the road, every part of it. "Half the trade of the kingdom passes through those quays: grain, wool, timber, powder, iron, and the men who hold the charters here hold more gold than most lords ever dream of. That is why they finished to protect it." "Then we had best look the part," Evelyn said. She had dressed for the city with great care. Gone was the morning grey. She wore a fine travelling gown of deep blue trimmed with silver, a bonnet in the newest fashion, and about her throat, in place of the hidden key, a string of pearls. She looked every inch a duchess on her wedding tour, come to show her new husband's northern bride the pleasures of the coast. The brass key she had moved to a chain at her waist, and the emperor's sword rode in its velvet within a fine carved chest that a footman would carry a respectful pace behind them wherever they went. That was the whole of the disguise, not a hidden thing, but a plain one, worn boldly in the open. A duke and his new duchess, idle and rich, come to see the sights. No one who watched them step down from the coach at the finest inn in Oakhaven would guess they had come to tear the city's masters out by the roots. They spent the first 2 days doing exactly what such a couple would do. They walked the fashionable streets. Vane bought her ribbons she did not want, and a shawl she did. They took tea in the great glass-fronted rooms above the harbor where the merchant families gathered to be seen. They let themselves be introduced, let the wealthy wives of Oakhaven flutter and curtsy and murmur behind their fans at the sight of a real duke and his mysterious northern bride. Word of them spread through the city just as they wished it to, harmless, idle, grand. And all the while Evelyn watched and listened. She learned the names at those tea tables. Lord Merrick, master of the grain charter, a heavy man with rings on every finger and a laugh too loud for his small eyes. Sir Hollis Crane, who held the powder and iron trade, thin and grey and precise as a clerk. And above them both, spoken of always in careful lowered voices, a man named Alderton, who held the harbour charter itself, and to whom, it seemed, all the others answered. These were the trade lords. These were the men her brother had died to expose. She smiled at their wives across the teacups and thought of Thomas thrown into the fire, and she did not let the smile slip once. On the third day, they began the true work. "There is a counting-house at the head of the quay," Vane told her that morning, low, as they walked the seafront with the footman and the sword-chest trailing behind. "The merchant's registry. Every ship that docks at Oakhaven, every cargo it carries, is recorded there by law. Manifests, charters, the lot. If the trade lords falsified the army's supply shipments, the true records will differ from the ones sent to the camp. The proof begins there." "And such records are not shown to idle duchesses on their wedding tour," Evelyn said. "They are shown to no one but the charter holders themselves. The public is barred from the archive rooms. Even a magistrate must apply for weeks to see them." He glanced at her, "Which is why we did not bring a magistrate." The merchant's registry was a great pillared building of pale stone at the head of the main quay, grand as a cathedral, built to remind every sailor and merchant who truly ruled this coast. Clerks in black coats hurried up and down its steps. At the top, before tall bronze doors, stood 2 porters whose whole purpose was plainly to turn away anyone without business inside. Evelyn climbed the steps with Vane at her side and the footman behind, bearing the carved chest. The elder porter stepped forward, bowing but firm, a man well used to refusing the great. "Your pardon, my lord, my lady. The registry archives are closed to all but chartered members. I fear I cannot admit you, however I might wish to." Evelyn did not argue. She did not plead or invoke her husband's name or the pearls at her throat. She simply turned to the footman and said, quietly, "Open it." The footman knelt and unlocked the carved chest. Evelyn reached in and drew back the black velvet and lifted out the Emperor's sword into the grey harbour light. The gold hilt blazed. The great crimson stone in the pommel caught the sun and threw a red gleam across the pale stone steps. The old script along the scabbard seemed to burn. She did not brandish it. She held it across both open palms, level, the way one holds a thing that speaks for itself. The elder porter looked at it, and the color drained out of his face. His mouth opened. He knew it. Of course he knew it. Every man of standing in the kingdom knew it, though few living had ever seen it with their own eyes. His knees bent before his mind had even caught up, and he was bowing, low, the deep bow owed to the crown itself. "The Emperor's sword," he breathed. "My lady, forgive me, I did not... Of course. The archives are open to you. To any door in Oakhaven you may command." He was already turning, waving frantically at the younger porter to haul back the great bronze doors. "This way, please, anything you require." Evelyn wrapped the sword once more in its velvet, but did not return it to the chest. She carried it herself now, cradled in one arm, as she stepped past the stammering porter and through the doors into the cool marble hush of the merchant's registry. Vane fell into step beside her, and she saw the smallest curve at the corner of his mouth. "You take to it," he murmured, too low for the porters to hear. "I take to opening doors that were shut in my brother's face," she answered. Ahead, a long corridor ran back into the great building, lined with the closed doors of the archive rooms where the trade lords kept their secrets. Somewhere behind one of them lay the truth. Evelyn tightened her arm around the golden sword and walked toward it. The chance came 2 nights later, and it came dressed as a dinner. Sir Hollis Crane, master of the powder and iron trade, gave a grand supper at his townhouse in honor of the visiting Duke and Duchess. It was a thing of pure vanity on his part, a way to boast to all of Oakhaven that the great Duke Vane dined at his table. For Evelyn and Vane, it was the door they had been waiting for. They had learned much in 2 days inside the merchant's registry. The archive rooms held the day books and the current manifests, and those alone had shown that the numbers did not sit right. But the oldest records, the sealed ledgers going back to the years of the Northern Campaign, were not kept at the public registry at all. They were held in the private vaults beneath Crane's own counting house, a squat stone building beside his townhouse, guarded and locked. That was where the true proof would lie. The original shipping manifests, before any clerk had altered them for the army's eyes. And tonight, while every important man in Oakhaven sat at Crane's table, that counting house would stand nearly empty. "You are certain of this?" Vane murmured to her as their coach drew up at Crane's door. He was splendid in black and silver, and she in deep green with the pearls, and neither of them looked like anything but honored guests. "I am certain the manifests are in that vault, and I am certain the vault will never stand emptier than it does tonight," Evelyn answered. "You keep Crane and his friends at that table. Keep them drinking, keep them boasting, keep every eye upon the great Duke who deigns to dine with them. Leave the rest to me." Vane's jaw tightened. She saw how little he liked it, sending her alone into the dark while he sat safe at a supper table. But it was the only way. He was watched. He was known. A duchess slipping out to rest her head, pale from the crush and the wine, would draw no second glance. The supper was long and rich. Evelyn sat through course after course, smiling, saying little, watching Crane grow flushed and loud with pride at the head of his own table. Vane was magnificent. He drew the trade lords out, flattered them, asked them clever questions about their trade, and let them boast of their cleverness in answer. until Crane and heavy Lord Merrick and half the merchant princes of Oakhaven were leaning toward him like flowers toward the sun. Not one of them so much as looked at the quiet Duchess. When the fish had been cleared, Evelyn pressed a hand to her brow and turned to the lady beside her. "Forgive me, the journey, the heat of the room. I fear I must sit quietly a little while. Pray do not let me spoil the evening." A servant was summoned. A cool, retiring room was offered. Evelyn was led away from the noise with murmurs of concern, and no one thought a thing of it. The moment the door closed behind her, she was moving. She had marked the way that afternoon on a pretext of a walk. Out through a side passage, past the startled scullery maid whom she silenced with a coin and a smile, into the cold garden, and through the low gate that joined Crane's house to his counting house next door. She wore a dark cloak over the green gown now, drawn from beneath her seat, and the Emperor's sword was in her hand, wrapped in its velvet. The counting-house door was locked. She unwrapped the sword and showed it to the lone night clerk within, and the poor man went so white and bowed so low that she almost pitied him. He unlocked every door she pointed to and asked no questions of a woman bearing the crown's own authority. He led her down a narrow stone stair to the vault itself, a cold, low chamber lined with iron-bound chests and shelves of leather ledgers. Then he fled back up the stairs, only too glad to be gone from such company. Evelyn set her single candle on a shelf and began to search. The old campaign years were what she needed. She ran her fingers along the spines, reading dates by the flickering light, her heart beating hard in the silence. Grain accounts, wool, timber, and there, at the far end, a run of heavy ledgers bound in dark red, the shipping manifests for the northern supply lines from the very years her brother had marched and died. She lifted one down and opened it on the vault's narrow table, and there it was, the truth in plain ink. Column after column of shipments, powder, grain, medicine, blankets, all recorded as loaded at Oakhaven and dispatched north to the army. But beside each one, in a second column meant for the trade lord's own accounting, were figures that told the real tale. Half the powder sold on to a foreign buyer, a third of the grain diverted to private warehouses, whole shipments of medicine that had never gone north at all, marked here as sold, while the army's books, she knew, recorded them as delivered in full. The men had starved and gone unarmed in the field, and these ledgers showed exactly where every stolen ounce had gone and into whose purse. Her brother had been right about all of it. Here was the proof he had died reaching for. Evelyn tore free the worst of the pages, the ones that damned the trade lords beyond any denial, and folded them fast into the breast of her gown. She would take these to the high court and let the whole rotten scheme fall into the light. She gathered the sword, took up her candle, and turned for the stair. The candle flame guttered. A draught. A door, somewhere above, opening. Then a heavy, deliberate tread on the stone stairs, coming down. Evelyn froze. That was no frightened clerk. She snuffed her candle and pressed back against the shelves in the dark, the sword clutched to her chest, the stolen pages against her heart. A lantern's glow spilled down the stair. A man came into the vault, broad and slow, a ring of keys at his belt and a cudgel in his fist. A night watchman, and no timid one. His small eyes swept the chamber and found nothing amiss, and Evelyn dared to breathe. Then his lantern light fell upon the red ledger she had left open on the table. He stopped. He looked at the open book and at the shelf where its brothers stood, and slowly, his gaze began to travel around the dark vault. Evelyn did not wait to be found. She stepped from the shadows toward the stair, chin high, meaning to sweep past him with the sword's authority as she had swept past every locked door in Oakhaven. But this man did not bow. His eyes narrowed, and his hand went not to his cap, but to the door at the head of the stair. "Someone's been in the ledgers," he said, low and hard. "And I know my orders about them ledgers." He moved faster than a big man should. Before she reached the stair, he had backed up it, and the heavy vault door slammed shut above her, and she heard the bolt drive home. Then his footsteps, going away, fetching others. Evelyn stood alone in the pitch dark of the sealed vault, the golden sword useless in her hand where no eye could see it, and the stolen proof pressed against her racing heart. At Crane's table, Vane knew the moment something was wrong. An hour had passed since Evelyn was led away to rest. That was too long. A woman recovering from the heat of a room did not stay gone an hour while her husband dined. Vane had been counting the minutes beneath his easy talk, and when the second course of the meat was cleared, and still she had not returned, a cold certainty settled in his chest. He set down his glass. "Sir Hollis, my wife has been unwell a good while now. I fear the journey has taxed her more than she let on. You will forgive me if I go and see that she is cared for." Crane, flushed and merry, waved a heavy hand. Of course, my lord. The servants will show you. Take what time you need. A delicate thing, a new bride, in a strange city." He laughed at his own wit, and Vane smiled the smile he had worn all night and rose from the table without haste. The moment he was out of the dining room, the ease dropped from him like a coat. He found the retiring room where Evelyn had been taken. Empty. A maid, questioned sharply but quietly, remembered a lady in a dark cloak passing toward the side passage a good while since. A scullery girl, pressed harder, admitted with frightened eyes that a fine lady had given her a coin, to say nothing, and gone out through the garden gate toward the counting-house. Vane's blood ran cold. The counting-house. The vault. She had gone alone, as they had planned, and she had not come back, and that could mean only one thing. He went out through the garden the way she had gone, moving fast now, and came to the counting-house door. It stood ajar. Inside, a night clerk sat trembling behind his desk, and beyond him, at the head of a stone stair, 3 men had gathered. A broad night watchman with a cudgel, 2 more of Crane's guards, roused from wherever such men waited, and they stood over a heavy bolted door in the floor with the low, ugly satisfaction of men who had caught a thief and meant to make the most of it. Vane took in the whole of it in a glance. The bolted door, the men. He understood at once that Evelyn was behind it, sealed in the dark, and that everything now hung on the next few moments and how he chose to play them. He did not draw a blade. He had promised himself, long ago, that he would win this by law and not by blood, and blood would ruin them both. A duke who spilled a watchman's life in a locked vault would give the trade lords the very crime they had lied about, handed to them in truth. No. There was a sharper weapon in this house than any sword, and it was locked behind that bolt with his wife. "Who is master here?" Vane said, and his voice cut through the low room like a whip. The 3 men turned. The broad watchman stepped forward, cudgel in hand, not yet knowing whom he faced in the dark. "None of your affair. We've caught a thief in the vault, meddling with Sir Hollis's private ledgers. She'll answer for it to the magistrate come morning, whoever she claims to." "She will answer to no magistrate," Vane said, "for she has done no crime, and you, sir, are one careless word from ruin." The watchman's lip curled. "And who are you to say so?" "I am Duke Vane, and the woman you have sealed in that vault is my wife, the Duchess, and she carries upon her person the Emperor's sword, freely and lawfully granted to the House of Vane." He let that land, watched the name of the sword strike the room like cold water. "You know that relic. Every man of the Charter knows it. It carries the full authority of the crown. Do you understand what you have done? You have laid hands upon the bearer of the Emperor's sword. You have imprisoned the crown's own authority behind a bolt." The watchman's certainty cracked. One of the guards behind him took a step back, but the big man held his ground, jaw set. "I've my orders about them ledgers. No one touches them. Charter holders only. I don't care whose wife she—" "Your orders?" Vane's voice dropped, soft and deadly. "From whom? From Sir Hollis Crane, a charter holder. And by whose charter does Sir Hollis hold his trade at all? By the grant of the crown, the very authority that sword commands. Hear me now, and hear me plainly, for your life and your master's charter both hang upon it." He stepped closer, and the men gave way before him. "The bearer of the Emperor's sword may command any door in this kingdom opened to her. To refuse her is not theft prevented. It is defiance of the crown itself. The penalty for that defiance is not a fine. It is the immediate forfeiture of the trade charter under which this house stands. Every ship, every warehouse, every ounce of Sir Hollis Crane's fortune, struck from him in an hour because a watchman would not draw a bolt." The room had gone very still. The trembling clerk had risen from his desk. The two guards were looking at one another now, and then at the watchman, and Vane could see the fear spreading through them, the fear of men who had just understood they stood upon a trap door. "You have caught no thief," Vane said, quieter now, giving the big man the single narrow road out. "You have detained the Duchess in error in the dark, not knowing whom you served. A grave mistake, but an honest one, so long as you mend it this instant. Draw that bolt, open the door, beg her pardon, and this ends here, and your master keeps his charter, and you keep your place." His eyes hardened. "Or leave it shut one moment longer, and I will see Sir Hollis Crane a beggar by dawn, and you the man who made him one." For a long breath, the watchman did not move. Vane watched the calculation run its course behind those small eyes, the weight of the sword against the weight of his orders, until the fear won, as fear of ruin always wins. The big man bent. He drew the bolt. He hauled the heavy vault door up on its hinges, and lamplight spilled down into the dark. Evelyn stood at the foot of the stair, the golden sword bare in her hand at last, her chin high, and her cloak drawn close over the stolen pages. She had heard every word. She climbed the stair without haste, and the watchman fell back before her and bowed low, and the guards bowed lower, and the clerk near fell to his knees. She stopped before Vane. Neither of them let a flicker of what they felt show upon their faces. Not there. Not before those men. "I trust I was not missed at supper," she said. "Not at all," said Vane. "Come, the night air will do you good." He offered his arm, and this time she took it, and together they walked out of the counting-house into the dark, the proof of everything pressed safe against her heart. They did not run. That was the thing the trade lords could never have guessed, and it was the thing that undid them. A thief who steals proof in the night flees with it into the dark. Evelyn and Vane did the opposite. They slept soundly at their inn, and in the grey of the next morning, while Oakhaven was still rubbing the sleep from its eyes, they walked straight up the steps of the High Court of Judicature and demanded to be heard. The High Court sat in the grandest building in the city, a great hall of dark paneling and high windows, where the magistrates of the region gave judgment. Word had raced ahead of them through the night, as they had known it would. By the time they entered, the hall was already filling. The watchman had run to Crane, and Crane to the others, and the trade lords had gathered in a knot at the front of the hall, certain of only one thing. The upstart duke and his meddling wife had overstepped at last, had broken into a private vault, and now would be brought low for it before the whole city. Lord Merrick was there, heavy and ringed, his loud laugh gone quiet. Sir Hollis Crane, grey and precise, his thin mouth pressed to a line. And behind them arrived only that morning a tall man in sober dark clothes who had said nothing yet, and whom the others deferred to without seeming to. Alderton, master of the harbour charter, the man to whom all the rest answered. 3 magistrates took their high seats. The eldest, a stern old man with white brows, called the hall to order and looked down upon the gathered company. "We are told there was a disturbance in the night," he said, "at the counting-house of Sir Hollis Crane. A vault entered, ledgers disturbed. Sir Hollis has laid a charge of theft. His cold eyes moved to Evelyn and Vane. And that the charge is laid against a duke and duchess makes it graver still, not lighter. Well, my lord, my lady, you do not deny you were in that vault? We deny nothing, Evelyn said, and her clear voice carried to every corner of the silent hall. I was in that vault. I entered it, and I took from it what I found there, and I have brought it here before this court to show you all exactly what it was. A murmur ran through the hall. Crane half rose, triumphant. There, you hear it? She confesses. Sit down, Sir Hollis, said the old magistrate. The court will hear the Duchess. Evelyn stepped forward to the long central table before the magistrate's bench. Behind her, the footman came bearing the carved chest. She opened it herself. And she lifted out the Emperor's sword and laid it down upon the table in full view of the entire hall, the gold hilt and the great crimson stone blazing in the light of the high windows. The whole court came to its feet. The magistrates rose from their high seats. Every man in the hall who knew that relic, and all of them knew it, bowed his head before it, as before the crown itself. The eldest magistrate's stern face had gone pale. The Emperor's sword, he said, and his voice was not quite steady. In this court, my lady, do you bear it lawfully? Lawfully granted to the House of Vane, and to me by my marriage, as the records of the church at the provincial capital will show, Evelyn answered. I bear the full authority of the crown, and by that authority I did not steal from that vault. I commanded it opened, as is my right at any door in this kingdom, and I took from it evidence of a crime far greater than any theft. Hear me, and then judge who in this hall are the true thieves. She drew the folded pages from her breast and laid them beside the sword. These are the original shipping manifests from the counting house of Sir Hollis Crane, kept in his own private vault, in his own clerk's hands, she said. They record the supplies loaded at Oakhaven for the Northern Army through the years of the campaign: powder, grain, medicine, blankets for men freezing in the field. Her voice did not shake now, it rang. And beside each shipment, in these same ledgers, is a second reckoning. The powder sold to a foreign buyer, the grain turned into private warehouses, the medicine that never went north at all, marked here as sold for profit, while the army's own books recorded it delivered in full to the men who needed it. She looked up, and she looked at the trade lords, one by one. The men starved. The men went into battle without powder for their guns, and these lords grew rich upon what was stolen from them. My own brother, Captain Thomas Ashford, discovered this theft. He gathered the beginnings of this very proof, and for that he was set upon and finished on the North Road, before he could carry it to a court like this one. She turned to the magistrates. The manifests are in his criminal's own hand. Compare them with the army's supply books. The lie is plain. It is all here. The hall had gone utterly silent. The eldest magistrate took up the pages with careful hands and read, and his white brows drew down, and the two magistrates beside him leaned in to read over his shoulder, and Evelyn watched their faces change. Crane had gone the color of ash. Merrick's rings clinked as his heavy hands began to tremble. They had come to this hall to see their enemies ruined, certain of their own safety, certain the proof was still locked in the dark where it could never speak. They had never imagined it would be laid upon the court's own table before the crown's own sword. The whole clever scheme, the crime, the stolen goods, the lie that had made an honest duke a villain, all of it had turned in their hands and now pointed back at their own hearts. Only Alderton did not tremble. He looked at the sword and at the pages and at Evelyn and Vane beside her, with the cold, still face of a man who has just watched the ground open beneath him and has not yet begun to fall. The eldest magistrate set down the pages. He looked up, and when he spoke, His voice was heavy as iron.
"These records are genuine. The clerk's hands upon them can be proven, and the army's books will bear out every word the Duchess has spoken."
He turned his gaze upon the trade lords, and it was terrible. "Lord Merrick, Sir Hollis Crane, Master Alderton, by the authority of this court, and bound as we are by the authority of the sword that lies before us, you are stripped of your charters from this hour. Your ships, your warehouses, your fortunes are forfeit to the crown, to be answered against the men you starved and the captain you ended. You will be held to answer for all of it, to the fullest reach of the law." The hall erupted. Guards moved forward. Crane sank into his seat with his head in his ringed hands, and Evelyn stood beside the golden sword, her brother's name at last cleared before the whole of Oakhaven, and let out a breath she felt she had been holding since the day she first wore gray. The North received them very differently the second time. Word of the High Court had run ahead of their carriage all the long road home, faster than any horse, the way such tales always travel. By the time they came down again into the provincial capital, the town that had watched Evelyn walk to the altar in morning grey now lined the streets to watch her pass. There was no whispering behind fans this time, no hungry, pitying stares. There was something the town had never once offered her before. There was respect. They knew now. They knew the whole of it. That the Duke they had named a criminal had never lifted a hand against Captain Ashford, but had pulled his burned journal from the fire and married his sister to arm her with the one weapon that could win justice. That the grey bride they had pitied had walked into the richest vaults in Oakhaven and laid the guilty low before the High Court itself. The trade lords were fallen, their fortunes seized, and the men who had starved in the northern field would be answered for at last. And the name of Ashford, which the town had spoken with such sorrow and such doubt, was clean. An old woman by the roadside pressed a posy of late flowers into Evelyn's hands as the carriage slowed.
"For your brother, my lady," she said. "A good man. We're sorry we ever doubted it."
Evelyn could not answer her for the tightness in her throat. She only held the flowers close and nodded, and the carriage rolled on. They did not linger in the capital. There was nothing there for either of them now but old ghosts. They went north, up through the foothills and the thinning mist, back to the deep green valley and the great stern house of dark stone that Evelyn had first entered as a wary stranger clutching a locked case to her side. It looked different to her now, not a prison, not a captor's keep, a home, or the beginning of one. Mrs. Fenwick wept openly when they came and clasped Evelyn's hands and said she had never for one moment believed a word the town said, which was not quite true and did not matter in the least. The valley folk, who had never hated Vane, seemed only quietly glad to have their master and his lady safely home, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Evelyn slept without the brass key at her throat. Some days later, when the worst of the weariness had lifted and the house had settled back into its slow northern rhythm, Evelyn asked Vane to walk with her. They went out onto the high terrace at the western end of the manor, the overlook her brother had never seen and would have loved. Below them, the whole valley lay open in the golden light of a late afternoon, the silver river winding through it, the sheep small as pearls on the far green slopes, the hills soft and blue in the distance. The evening was cold and clear and very still. Evelyn carried the Emperor's sword. She had taken it down from the carved chest one last time. She held it a moment in the failing light, this thing that had silenced a whole cathedral, that had opened every locked door in Oakhaven, that had brought the mighty to their ruin and set her brother's name to rest. Then she crossed to the wide stone mantel of the terrace hearth, where a bracket had been set to hold it, and she laid the golden sword up in its place of honor. "There," she said quietly. "It has done its work. It can rest now. And so can Thomas." Vane stood a little apart, watching her, and she turned to look at him properly, as she had not truly let herself do since the day at the altar. She thought of that day, of the gray gown she had chosen for mourning, of the stern, cold stranger she had refused to take by the arm, of the town's certainty and her own that she was being handed to her brother's criminal. How wrong she had been about all of it. How wrong they all had been.
The man she had taken for a captor had let a whole province believe the worst of him rather than risk her safety with the truth. He had grieved her brother as she grieved him. He had armed her, trusted her, stood outside a locked vault and won her freedom with law when a lesser man would have spilled blood. And never once, in all of it, had he asked a thing of her in return.
"When you gave me the sword," she said, "I stood in that cathedral and thought it must be some cruel jest. I could not understand why a man who had wronged me would place such a weapon in my hands. I have understood it a long while now, but I have never said to you what I ought to have said."
"You owe me nothing, Evelyn," he said. "I did what I did for Thomas as much as for you, and because it was right."
"I know that." She stepped closer. "That is exactly why I owe it. Not the debts of my family, not the sword, not the justice. Something you cannot demand and I did not have to give." She held his pale eyes, those eyes she had once thought gave nothing away,
and saw in them now everything he had kept so carefully hidden for so long.
"You never asked me to be your wife in anything but name. You gave me my own quarters and the far wing, and never once looked at me as though I were a prize you had won. You let me hate you rather than frighten me with a truth that could get us finished. A man does not do all that for a woman he does not honor." Vane was quiet a moment. The wind moved across the terrace and stirred the loose strands of her hair.
"No," he said at last, "he does not."
"Then let us have done with grey mourning and locked cases and disguises," Evelyn said, and she found she was smiling, truly smiling, for what felt like the first time in a year. "I did not choose this marriage, but I choose it now, freely, with my eyes open, of my own will. Not a captor, not an enemy, a partner. A husband, if you will have me as a wife in truth, and not only in name." Something eased in Vane's face then, some long-held guard she had never seen him lower, and he took her hand, and for once he did not measure his words or weigh how much to keep locked away. "I have wanted to earn that since before you would look at me," he said. "I will spend my life earning it still." They stood together on the high terrace as the sun went down over the valley, the golden sword resting quiet upon the mantle behind them, its work finished at last. Below them, the peaceful valley held its evening hush, and Evelyn Ashford, who had come north a grieving, unwilling bride in mourning grey, looked out over the land that was now her home, beside the man who was now, in every way that mattered, her husband and her equal, and knew that the long winter of her grief was over, and that spring, at last, had come.